is Sharon. Duke is one of you who is here today. You're very welcome. So, a couple of weeks ago, Pastor Jiru introduced the new topic for our Dharma talks for the rest of the year, which is dedication to practice, to Dharma, and to service. And so I wasn't here in person for it, but I did listen to it and watch it on the YouTube tape. And I was struck by a couple of terms that Master used. One was Dharma, not self, and the other was being, not self. Being stroke, not self. And if I understood him correctly, the first, Dharma, not self, means that we pursue the truth of Dharma through the teachings of Buddha, but without attachment. And being not self, I think, means that we view our fellow beings as not absolutely real, but as manifestations of contingent causes and conditions, ever-changing and empty. I also heard Master Jiru say that we must create the conditions that will support our own practice. And we do this by cultivating the mind states of renunciation and bodhi mind, or awakened mind. So I'd like to use Master's remarks and these teachings of his as my starting point today. I thought of titling this talk, How to Empty Myself of Self. But I think that's going to be another talk. So the three-part theme that Master's assigned as our topic for this year's talks, that's dedication to practice, to Dharma, and to service. It struck me that these parallel the triple gem, which we take refuge in as Buddhists. That is the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Practice in concentration and mindfulness in order to transform our consciousness is the great legacy of the Buddha. So when we cultivate our own practice of meditation, we take refuge in the example of the Buddha and the promise he gave us that this is the path that will lead to the ending of suffering and to liberation in non-attachment. So the second term in both lists, Master's topic and the triple gem, is the Dharma, which means the teachings of the Buddha, and also the reality of how things are. So we're called to dedicate ourselves to learning the Dharma and to take refuge in the truth of the Buddha's teachings. Master's third term, service, is, I think, related to the Sangha in the Triple Gem, because service is carried out in community. And in his talk, Master drew distinctions between the smaller scope of lay people's community and opportunities for service, namely to our spouse, children, extended family, work, and so forth. And the communal scope of monastics, the much wider scope, because they don't have those other connections that we lay people have. So they are, the scope of their community is basically all beings at all times. We take refuge in the Sangha because the Buddha established a community of practitioners who would teach and generate benefits for all of society through their meditation, study, and purity or virtue. In our lives today, we recognize that our spiritual path also requires the instruction and example of teachers and the support and engagement with spiritual friends with whom we learn and practice. So service in the Buddhist sense can mean different things. householders, lay people, we obviously have a duty to serve our families, to repay our employers with good work, and to offer help and generosity to those in our larger community who are in need and not as fortunate as ourselves. But these forms of service are not unique to Buddhism, clearly. So for us, foremost, I believe, service consists of playing our part in our community of practitioners by studying and practicing faithfully with our peers in order to benefit their practice and progress on the path, as well as our own. And in order to acknowledge respectfully and try to repay the instruction and example of our teachers. The challenge we face as lay practitioners is how to strike a balance between our duties to family and work and our call to compassionate service toward the wider community and its needs, along with our need for formal meditation practice. I know from experience, and surely many of the rest of you also, realize how challenging it can be to find this balance. But if we look at the causes of our difficulty in finding balance in life between practice, Dharma, and service, what do we find? We find discrimination and separation into different selves. By grasping to the idea of myself, I set up an opposition, a separation between myself and other beings. I set up an opposition between service at home and service at work. I set up an opposition between my formal practice and doing all things mindfully and compassionately. Just as Master Jiru said that practice, Dharma, and service are three that come out of one, and one that expands into three, we need to realize the unity of practice, truth, and the teachings, and service in our life. My formal practice sets up conditions for me to better serve others by dissolving the ego and establishing a more compassionate and wise mental state. My daily obligations and work are opportunities for me to practice generosity, patience, mindfulness, loving kindness, compassion, and other virtues, which in turn strengthen my concentration. My study of Dharma and sharing of my learning, as in talks like this, supports my practice and is also an opportunity to serve others. When we see how interconnected these three ideals are, how could we not dedicate ourselves to them? It's such a wonderful way to live a life of integrity and purpose. And I see this dedication to these three ideals as really identical to taking refuge in the Triple Gem. And that taking refuge is not something we do one time when we take the precepts and decide to become a Buddhist. Taking refuge is an ongoing process in our lives. It is really our practice on a daily basis because it requires this rededication of us to formal practice, to the teachings, and to service in the community or Sangha. So now I'd like to continue my talk by turning to an authority higher and wiser than myself, whose ideas and words can shed much more light on these interconnected concepts. Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi has written a wonderful essay comparing the Theravada and Mahayana aims and traditions, and does a great job of reconciling them and showing how the two are not as opposed as some of their respective adherents might believe. I'd like to share some of his ideas with you because I think they speak very well to the theme of our talks on dedication to practice, to Dharma, and to service. What I hope to make clear is that both schools of Buddhism fulfill equally the three areas of dedication, although with a difference of emphasis. For newcomers to Buddhism, just to give you some background, there are two main schools or traditions within Buddhism today. The Theravada, which is concentrated in South and East Asia, places like Thailand, Burma, Sri Lanka, and the Mahayana, which is concentrated in northern countries like China, Japan, Tibet, and Korea. And of course, both schools have spread to this country and throughout the world, but those are their original places of concentration. Theravada is the earlier classical Buddhism, which has as its scriptural authority the teachings of the Buddha as preserved in the Pali Canon. While Mahayana developed 100 to 200 years after the Buddha's death and has its own set of scriptures called the Prajnaparamita Sutras, or Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And there are stereotyped views of these two schools that go like this. Theravadan Buddhists have the ideal of the Arahant, a person who is concerned exclusively with his or her own salvation as opposed to the benefit of others. They have a narrow fixation on personal liberation because they fear birth and death, and therefore have little compassion for others and don't undertake activities intended to benefit them. Mahayana practitioners, on the other hand, and again this is the stereotype view, follow the Bodhisattva ideal, which is to defer one's own liberation from suffering and into nirvana until all other beings have first been liberated. So they are much more involved in social projects aimed at benefiting others, so that they're so involved that they don't take up the practice that the Buddha assigned to his disciples, namely the taming of the mind and the development of insight. They have overwhelmed themselves with social duties and forsaken meditation practice. And for any newcomers, here at MABA, we are in the Mahayana tradition, and so we've already seen that we have not exactly abandoned meditation practice as we begin our service every Sunday with that. So Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi does a wonderful job of showing that these two stereotyped views are anything but correct. And if you're new to Buddhism and considering which school you'll follow, there's probably not much to choose between except, as Master Jiru has often pointed out, only the uniform. So beginning with the Theravadan school, and particularly the ancient Arahants, we see that they didn't just sit back and reap the benefits of the path while doing nothing for others. Many of them became teachers in their own right, capable of guiding others to enlightenment. Best known are people like Sariputta, Mahakachana, Moggallana, and Ananda. Followers of the Arahant path are inspired by the example of the Buddha and his great disciples to work for the spiritual and moral uplifting of others to the best of their ability, by teaching, by example, and by direct spiritual influence, in keeping with the Buddha's command to wander forth for the welfare of the multitude, for the happiness of the multitude, out of compassion for the world, for the good, welfare, and happiness of devas and human beings. Theravadan practitioners might follow a life path very similar to the Buddha's. In their early life, they may go to a forest monastery or retreat center to train under a teacher. Then, after reaching a level of maturity in their practice, they may go into solitude to practice on their own for a number of years. At a certain point, their achievements will start to exert an influence over others. So they may start to teach on their own initiative or because their teacher urges them to. In time, they may become very respected spiritual teachers with many students of their own. In contrast to the image of selfish personal liberation that some Mahayana Buddhists ascribe to arahants and those following the Sravakayana, that is, the hearer or disciple path. There are eminent masters of the Theravada tradition who often teach thousands of disciples, working many, many hours a day. In recent times, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi cites Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw of Burma, who established hundreds of meditation centers in that country, Ajahn Chah, Venerable Pa'auk Sayadaw, U Pandita, and Bhante Gunaratana, all of whom have traveled throughout the world conducting courses in meditation. Ajahn Mahabua supports 60 hospitals in Thailand and visits them to console the ill and to distribute medicines. Those who are not competent to become meditation teachers, and I believe Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi puts himself in this category, might still become masters of Buddhist texts and philosophy and devote themselves to guiding others to an understanding of the Dharma. And translation is obviously another major task that Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi has engaged in. And in terms of finding a perfect example of a bodhisattva in today's world, we need look no further than Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi himself, who is a Theravadan monk and who founded and directs the aid organization Buddhist Global Relief, which works for the relief of hunger and empowers people in developing countries to have more secure livelihoods. And just a reminder that we hope to have Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi with us next October to lead us in a walk for hunger relief to benefit his aid organization. So hopefully many of you can take part in that. I think it's October 5th. To Theravadan practitioners, social work is praiseworthy, but the most precious gift one can share with others is the gift of the Dharma. Giving, or dana, is the foundation for all other virtues, the first basis of merit, and the first of the 10 paramis. Thus, the Pali scriptures encourage people to give to the best of their ability. Lay people support the monastic sangha with food, robes, dwellings, and medicines. They also give generously to the poor and disadvantaged. In Sri Lanka, for example, blood donation campaigns are common on Buddhist holidays. Many monks have donated kidneys without thought of any personal benefit, but only for the privilege of giving a bodily organ. Monks give according to their abilities, whether as teachers, administrators of monasteries, or through intensive individual practice to generate benefit for the world. Now I'll turn to the Bodhisattva path, or Mahayana school. The foundation of the Bodhisattva path is the arising of bodhicitta, or awakened mind, enlightenment. This is also associated with the aspiration of boundless loving kindness and compassion toward all living beings. And this usually arises through diligent training in meditation. Realizing bodhicitta is not that easy. Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi says that the Dalai Lama admitted to experiencing real bodhicitta only a few times, and for a few moments each time. So we can imagine what a difficult task it might be. It takes much more than engaging in a little social service and convincing ourselves that we have aroused bodhicitta. While the Bodhisattva path followers do work for the welfare of others in a broader way than followers of the Sravaka vehicle, their efforts are superficial without the support and motivation of bodhicitta. Bodhisattvas, or aspiring bodhisattvas, must train in the 6 paramitas, or perfections, which also begin with dana, or generosity. But for both Shravakas and Bodhisattvas, the greatest gift one can give another is the gift of Dharma, which alone leads to the permanent extinction of suffering. To be qualified to give this gift requires skills that go far beyond social service. The second paramita is sila, or morality, which can certainly include social engagement that benefits others. Those involved in social service also have the obligation to train in the perfection of patience, the third paramita. Patience is required in enduring difficult situations, patience in enduring disregard and abuse from others. Patience is called ksanti in Sanskrit. The work of social service also requires energy, which helps fulfill the virya paramita, perfection of energy. So we see that through social engagement, the follower of the Bodhisattva path can train in 4 of the 6 paramitas. But there are 2 more perfections required of a Bodhisattva, jhana and prajna, meditation and wisdom, both of which require adoption of a contemplative lifestyle, one similar to the arahants, or those on the arahant path. If we look at the history of Mahayana Buddhism, whether in India, China, or Tibet, we see that the great Mahayana masters such as Nagarjuna, Asanga, and Atisha in India, Huineng, Zhiyi, and Xuanzang in China, Longchen, Gampopa, and Tsongkhapa in Tibet were not famous for their dedication to social service, but for being accomplished philosophers, scholars, and meditation masters. Since bodhisattvas aim to become Buddhas, it's only natural that they should perfect the meditation skills that are characteristic of a Buddha. So just as we've seen that followers of the Shravaka vehicle often work very hard for the spiritual and material benefit of others, likewise followers of the Mahayana path must often spend long periods in solitary meditation. They have to study all the doctrines and the paths of the Shravaka vehicle, yet without actualizing those paths. Bodhisattvas will have to learn to enter the meditative absorptions, practice them, and eventually master them. They will have to contemplate the 3 marks of existence: impermanence, suffering, and non-self. They also have to acquire the insight knowledges into those 3 characteristics. But whereas the arahants use these insights to attain nirvana, the bodhisattvas will be able to contemplate the natural nature of reality without attaining realization of nirvana until they have matured all the qualities that are perfected in Buddhahood. Qualities that enable them not only to bestow material benefits on beings, but also the spiritual benefits of Dharma. Bhikkhu Bodhi sums up his essay by saying that, in his view, both paths or vehicles, whether arahant and bodhisattva, can be seen as valid expressions of the Buddha's teaching. Both must conform to such teachings as the Four Noble Truths, the 3 marks or characteristics of existence, and dependent origination. In practice, they must demonstrate wholesome morality and ethics, and train in the Noble Eightfold Path, which includes the 3 areas of morality, concentration, and wisdom. He says that Buddhists as a whole must practice tolerance toward both schools, respecting both the authenticity of early Buddhism, as far as can be determined from the oldest historical records, and also recognizing that Buddhism can undergo genuine historical transformations that bring forth hidden potentials of the ancient teaching, which the Mahayana teachings have done. I want to conclude with a direct quote from Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi because I find it such an eloquent summary of his arguments. He says, "True Buddhism needs Buddhas, Arahants, and Bodhisattvas. It needs Buddhas to discover and teach the path to liberation. It needs Arahants to follow the path and confirm that the Dharma does indeed lead to liberation, adorning the teaching with examples of those who lead the purest holy life. It needs Bodhisattvas to bring forth the resolve to perfect those qualities that will enable them at some point in the future, near or distant, to become Buddhas themselves and once again turn the unsurpassed wheel of Dharma." So I hope this talk has contributed in a meaningful way to the topic of self-dedication to practice, to Dharma, and to service. I hope I've done justice to Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi's ideas on how the Theravada and Mahayana schools are more similar than different, and how practice, Dharma, and service are necessary aspirations for anyone who tries to follow the Buddha's teachings, whether on the Arahant or the Bodhisattva path. So thank you for your attention, and may any benefit arising from this talk help to liberate beings from their suffering.